Dear friends, in this class we shall discuss auxiliary verbs in detail. Let's learn what auxiliary verbs are. Verbs that help main verbs are called auxiliary verbs or helping verbs. Then how do they help the main verbs? They help the main verbs to describe an action that happened in the past or is happening in the present or will happen in the future. Types of auxiliary verbs. There are 24 auxiliary verbs in English. They are classified into two groups, the primary auxiliary verbs and the modal auxiliary verbs. The primary auxiliary verbs are 11 in number. The modal auxiliary verbs are 13 in number. You see, once again, auxiliary verbs, they are 24 in number. They are classified into two groups, primary auxiliaries 11 in number, modal auxiliaries 13 in number. Let's talk about the primary auxiliary verbs now. Primary auxiliary verbs. There are 11 primary auxiliary verbs in English. We can classify them into three different groups. They are: first one, be forms, second one, have forms, and third one, do forms. Let's learn them in detail. First one, be forms. Am, is, are, was, and where are the be forms in English language. Am, is, and are used in the present tense. Was and where are the two auxiliary verbs that we use in the past tense. The negative form of am is am not. Negative form of is not. Negative form of are is are not. Then the contracted form of am not is aren't. We often use aren't instead of am not, especially in the question time. The negative form of is not. The contracted form of is not is isn't. Next we have are. The negative form of are is are not. Contracted form of are not is aren't. Fourth one, was. Negative form is was not. Contracted form is wasn't. Fifth one, were. Negative form is were not. The contracted form is weren't. Second one, have forms. Has, have, and had are the three have forms that we use in English language. Has and have are the auxiliary verbs that we use in the present tense. Had is used in the past tense. The negative form of has is has not. Negative form of have is have not. The negative form of had is had not. The contracted form of has not is hasn't. The contracted form of have not is haven't. Contracted form of had not is hadn't. Then we have do forms. Do forms are do, does, and did. Do and does are used in the present tense. Did is used in the past tense. The negative form of do is do not. Contracted form of do not is don't. Second one, does. Does not is the negative form. Doesn't is its contracted form. 11th one is did. Negative form is did not. Contracted form is didn't. That's the end of primary auxiliary verbs. Shall we move to the next category, that is modal auxiliary verbs. Modal auxiliary verbs. The first one is shall. The negative form of shall is shall not, and contracted form of shall not is shan't. Number 2, will. Negative form is will not. Contracted form of will not is owned. Third one, should. Negative form is should not. Contracted form is shouldn't. Fourth one, would. Negative form is would not. Contracted form is wouldn't. Fifth one, can. Negative form of can is cannot. The contracted form of cannot is can't. Then the sixth one, that is could. Negative form of could is could not. The contracted form of could not is couldn't. Seventh one, may. May not is its negative form, mayn't is its contracted form. Eighth one, might. Might not, mightn't. Ninth one, must. Negative form is must not, and contracted form is mustn't. Tenth one, ought to. Negative form is ought not to. Contracted form is oughtn't to. 11th one, need. Negative form is need not. Contracted form is needed. 12th one, dare. Negative form is dare not. Contracted form is daren't. The last one, that is used to. Used not to is its negative form. Used to is its contracted form. The use of modal auxiliary verbs will be discussed later. Let me call it a day. Bye bye.